Welcome to Whispering Reapers, where we wander into the shadows of our reality and bring back stories that stretch the limits of terror. Today, I have 10 true accounts that will creep under your skin, make your heart hammer against your chest, and remind you that the horrors in our world can often outmatch anything imagined. Let us begin. Story 1. The Silent Call. I was living on the outskirts of a small, rural town, a place where streetlights were sparse and neighbors were few and far between. Late one summer night, I received a phone call that changed my perspective on what it means to be afraid. The voice on the other end was impossibly quiet, like a faint whisper pushing through layers of static. I tried to speak, to ask who was calling, but I heard no answer, only the steady hush of someone breathing. At first, I assumed it was a prank call, maybe some local kids finding new ways to amuse themselves, but a chill sank into my spine when I heard my name spoken in a voice I did not recognize. It was softly uttered, but somehow I felt that whoever was on the line knew me intimately. Before I could respond, the call ended abruptly. I was living on the outskirts of a small rural town, a place where streetlights were sparse and neighbors were few and far between. Late one summer night, I received a phone call that changed my perspective on what it means to be afraid. The voice on the other end was impossibly quiet, like a faint whisper pushing through layers of static. I tried to speak, to ask who was calling, but I heard no answer, only the steady hush of someone breathing. At first, I assumed it was a prank call, maybe some local kids finding new ways to amuse themselves. But a chill sank into my spine when I heard my name spoken in a voice I did not recognize. It was softly uttered, but somehow I felt that whoever was on the line knew me intimately. Before I could respond, the call ended abruptly. The next evening, right around the same late hour, the phone rang again. This time, against my better judgment, I picked up. The whisper was back, only now I caught a phrase I'll never forget. "I'm watching." My skin prickled with an intense dread that I had never experienced before. I demanded to know who it was, threatened to call the police, anything to force this silent observer out of my life. But the more I shouted, the quieter the line seemed to grow, and soon I heard only the faint hiss of static. Shortly after the call ended. There was no number on my caller ID, no record that the call had even existed. In my anxiety, I asked a friend of mine who worked in telecommunications to trace it. He reported that no logs existed of anyone contacting me at that time. For several days, the phone rang at odd hours, always providing that same whisper, that same dreadful tone that recognized me by name. Desperate to feel safe, I changed my phone number, but the calls kept coming, precisely at midnight, as though guided by some unearthly schedule. I unplugged my phone, only to then be awoken by the cacophony of a ring that should have been impossible. Shaken to my core, I pressed the phone to my ear, only to hear silence. Then came that whisper once again. "I'm outside." Frantic, I rushed to every window. My property was drenched in the blackness of night, illuminated only by a single flickering porch light. I scanned the yard with a flashlight, but saw no one. Yet the oppressive feeling that I was not alone gnawed at my psyche. My friend suggested it might be some malfunction or a ghost call echoing through phone lines. But as the nights wore on, each call became more disturbing. One night I listened, horrified, as the whisper repeated the exact same words I had yelled at it days before, mirroring my voice perfectly but in a slow, distorted manner. Another night I heard the sound of scratching, almost as if nails were being dragged across metal, echoing right into my ear, so real that it made me check the phone for damage. It was as if something intangible was lurking in the phone line, feeding on my fear. One particularly bad night, I ignored the call. But the moment I silenced the ringer, I heard a violent pounding at my front door, followed by the phone lighting up again. I crept toward the door, peering through the peephole. No one was there. Every rational part of me resisted opening the door, so I ran back to the phone. The whisper was deeper, more malevolent. "Let me in," it said. The words oozed with anger. My heart pounded and I broke into a sweat, feeling as though a predator was circling. That was when I noticed that my porch light, which had been flickering, suddenly blew out entirely, plunging the front yard into utter darkness. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no sign of anyone. They found no footprints, no evidence of tampering. One officer suggested that it might be a local troublemaker, though he seemed puzzled by how the calls penetrated a phone line that was disconnected most nights. I tried sleeping at a relative's place, but the phone calls followed me there, the line ringing eerily at the same midnight hour. My relatives couldn't believe that a call even went through their private number, and still the whisper repeated, "I'm outside." Terror soon formed a permanent pit in my stomach. I barely slept, jolting awake at the faintest sound. My phone line provider could do nothing. They claimed they had never seen such an anomaly. I began to think something paranormal had latched onto me. My only option seemed to be silent endurance, waiting for it to grow tired or for me to lose my sanity entirely. Days turned into weeks, and eventually the calls stopped, inexplicably, without warning, as if someone had flipped a switch. I've never received another call, and I pray I never do. Yet, to this day, I don't answer calls from unknown numbers. A part of me fears that faint, chilling whisper might return, reminding me it's still watching. Back when I was around 16, my biggest worry was typical teenage angst. I lived in a quiet residential area full of neatly trimmed hedges and pastel-colored houses with little drama to speak of. One evening I was returning from a friend's place. The streetlights overhead cast a dull orange glow. As I walked, I noticed a figure standing under one of the streetlights, stained in shimmering gold from the harsh radiance above. I got closer, and that's when I realized that the figure was actually facing me. It wore a hooded sweatshirt, obscuring its facial features, but I could sense its eyes tracking me. Feeling uneasy, I considered crossing the street, but I told myself it was likely just a passerby or a neighbor. I kept going, trying not to make eye contact. Then I realized I'd made a grave error. This figure was not simply standing there, it was waiting for me. The moment I passed under the adjacent streetlight, I heard a raspy intake of breath, like someone trying to hold in their excitement. I walked faster, but I felt the figure's gaze latch onto me with all-consuming intensity. My palms grew sweaty and my heart began to pound. My logic told me to remain calm. This was just another person out for a walk at night, but every intuition screamed danger. As I hurried along, I glanced behind me. The figure had moved out of the light and was now in step with my pace, trailing me but maintaining some distance. Its hood was still drawn, and it glided along the sidewalk almost too smoothly, its silhouette unsettling under the flickering streetlights. By the time I reached my street, my nerves were shot. I had the desperate urge to run, but something told me that running might provoke a chase. Instead, I maintained a brisk walk, chest tightening with each step. Finally, I reached my driveway. Without looking back, I fumbled with my keys, cursing myself for not leaving the porch light on. I jammed the key into the lock, and just before I opened the door, I ventured a quick glance over my shoulder. The figure stood at the foot of my driveway, body half hidden in the darkness. Even though I couldn't see its face, I was sure it was staring at me. I zipped inside, locking the door with trembling fingers. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tiptoed to the window and peered through a small gap in the curtains. There it was, still standing in my driveway. No movement, no attempt to come closer, just a silent vigil. The sight practically stopped my heart. I tried to rationalize it, thinking it might be a prank or an odd neighbor. I decided I would call the police if it stayed any longer. Yet when I checked again moments later, the driveway was empty, as though the figure had evaporated into the night. The next few days passed without incident, and I managed to convince myself it had all been a misunderstanding. Then, on a particularly windy evening, I heard a rustling outside my bedroom window. Initially, I dismissed it as branches scraping against the house. But curiosity got the better of me, and I lifted the blinds slightly. Through the gloom, I made out a shape pressed against the other side of the glass. My blood turned cold as I recognized the hooded silhouette. The figure's face, or what should have been a face, was nearly flush with the pain. In the faint moonlight, I realized there were no distinct features visible, just a wide, dark void. I choked down a scream, stepped back quietly, and tried to calm my shaking hands. I did the only thing that felt logical. I slid my phone out of my pocket and dialed 911. While waiting on the line, I moved as stealthily as possible to my parents' room, adrenaline pumping through my body. My parents sprang out of bed, turned on lights, and phoned the police once again while I stood frozen, my mind replaying that image in my bedroom window. As soon as light flooded the yard, the silhouette vanished without a sound. The police found no footprints, but did notice the bushes under my window were unnaturally flattened, as though someone had stood there for quite some time. Night after night I tried to sleep, but I would jolt awake at the slightest noise, convinced that monstrous hooded shape was waiting for me, pressing its face to the glass. My parents tried to brush it off as an overactive imagination, but they knew I wasn't prone to wild stories. They installed motion sensor lights. We kept the curtains drawn. For a while, nothing happened. And then, weeks later, I found a small puddle of water by my window in the morning. The sill was damp, the glass smeared with residue that looked disturbingly like a face print. I shuddered, recalling the blank void where eyes and a nose should have been. I never saw the figure again, but for years afterward I avoided looking out windows at night. The memory still feels too real, too raw. Occasionally, when I'm walking home alone and a streetlight flickers, I swear I see a hooded figure standing just at the edge of my vision. Always watching, always waiting, reminding me that in the dead of night, we may become objects for the gaze of something beyond our understanding. Story 3, The House on Dead Man's Curve. At the distant edge of my hometown stood a stretch of roads known as Dead Man's Curve, infamous for its sharp turn and the taller-than-average number of accidents reported there. When I was younger, my friends and I treated it like a local legend. We'd drive by at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of the rumored ghostly apparitions said to drift across the road. How many times did I hear tales of a desperate hitchhiker or a pale figure in a white dress standing at the bend? Too many to count. Yet each visit, we came away disappointed, having seen nothing beyond swirling fog and ominous silhouettes of dead trees. Everything changed a few autumns ago. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to get out of the car and explore the area on foot. Because the place was mostly deserted, it felt as though I was stepping into another realm, one dominated by silence and the pungent odor of wet leaves. After a short stroll, I noticed a dilapidated old house set back from the road, half swallowed by foliage. It was so easy to miss that I wondered how many times I had driven by without noticing. A broken wooden fence, windows boarded up from the inside, and an overgrown lawn all captured my imagination in the worst possible way. Despite a nagging sense of dread, I felt compelled to approach. The front door was slightly ajar, and I rationalized that if anyone lived there, it was likely a squatter or someone who wouldn't want me poking around. Still, I stepped inside, carefully avoiding broken glass and rotting floorboards. The interior reeked of mildew. A single hallway stretched ahead, rooms branching off on each side. The atmosphere felt oppressive, the walls weathered and stained. I took out my phone to use its flashlight and moved slowly, heart intensifying its pounding with each step. Entering what might once have been a living room, I noticed blackened remains of a fireplace, with fragments of charred debris around it. Then, an odd shape caught my eye in the corner. At first, I thought it was a piece of furniture draped with cloth. But to my dismay, I realized it was a large, crudely constructed structure made of sticks, feathers, and tattered cloth, arranged in a manner that resembled a small altar. My flashlight flickered, and for an instant I thought I saw something move just beyond the edge of the beam. The place felt like it was steeped in sinister energy. Shaken, I considered turning back, but curiosity again pushed me to explore further. Down the hall, I found a tiny bedroom that seemed stripped bare, except for a weather-worn mattress and a large mirror leaning against the wall. The mirror's frame was ornate, covered in swirling patterns of ivy and vines carved into the wood. Though the glass was dirty, I could see my reflection, pale and terrified. Out of nowhere, I became intensely certain I was not alone. I sensed a presence behind me, even heard what sounded like a soft exhale of breath. My skin crawled. I spun around, the flashlight beam slicing through shadows, but there was nothing there, just emptiness and silence. I passed through unsettling pockets of cold air as I returned to the hallway, the hair on my arms standing on end. The deeper I ventured, the more the house felt alive, as though it had a consciousness slithering through its corridors. Odd markings appeared on the walls, scratches, strange symbols, remnants of candles. In one room, a circle drawn in chalk spanned most of the floor, with melted wax pooled around it as if someone had performed a ritual. The sight was profoundly disturbing, and a voice in the back of my head urged me to leave immediately. On my way out, I heard a distinct sound of wood creaking as though footsteps pressed down on the floorboards not far behind me. My heart thundered in my chest. I called out, my voice trembling, "Hello?" The only answer was silence. Then, to my absolute horror, I saw a shape at the end of the hallway, just beyond my flashlight's range. It appeared vaguely human, but the features were impossible to discern. My instincts roared to run, so I sprinted toward the front door. As I fled, I heard a low murmur, like someone chanting in a hushed voice. I didn't dare look back. Once outside, I dashed to my car, breathing so hard my chest felt on fire. The house loomed behind me, half buried in the darkness. I could almost imagine it pulsing with a malevolent heartbeat. When I finally drove away, I inspected the rearview mirror, half expecting the shape to come bursting out. But everything remained eerily still. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of that house. I had recurring nightmares of dark corridors, of altars made from sticks and bone, of that shadowy figure looming at the end of a hall. My friends begged me to describe what happened in detail, but words failed. Even now, passing that curve or hearing the stories about it reminds me of that rotting, haunted dwelling. I don't know who built that altar or what rituals had been performed, but I'm convinced the ghosts rumored to wander Dead Man's Curve have something to do with that house and whatever dark practice once took place within its walls. Story 4. The Cabin in the Woods. A few years ago, my cousin and I decided to take a weekend getaway at a primitive cabin deep in the forest. A friend owned the property and offered it to us for a minimal fee. The idea was appealing escape civilization, do some fishing, and enjoy the simplicity of nature. The cabin was small, rustic, with no electricity or running water. We brought lanterns, canned food, and a sense of adventure. Little did we know we were about to experience the most bone-chilling weekend of our lives. The first day was nothing special. We hiked, snapped photos of the lush greenery, and built a small fire to roast our dinner. Night soon blanketed the woods, and aside from the soft glow of our lanterns, darkness swallowed everything. The quiet was novel at first, then it became unnerving. The lack of civilization meant the slightest crack of a twig or rustle of leaves carried for miles. Around midnight, just as we settled into our sleeping bags, we heard a thunderous crash outside as though a large tree had toppled over. We both jumped up, hearts pounding. My cousin grabbed a flashlight and I followed him onto the porch. We saw no fallen tree, no sign of any disturbance at all, just the restless forest swaying in the moonlight. The sound had been so loud, so real, that it was impossible to believe there was no evidence of what caused it. Trying to dismiss our unease, we returned inside and bolted the door. Sleep, however, did not come easily. In the deepest part of the night, we woke again to a strange scraping noise along the cabin's outer wall. My cousin and I exchanged worried glances, each of us too afraid to investigate. Instead, we huddled in silence, listening as the scraping drifted around the perimeter. Eventually, it stopped, leaving us to wonder if our minds were playing tricks on us. Come morning, we emerged cautiously, scanning the ground for evidence. Sure enough, we discovered deep scratch marks in the wood near the cabin's back corner. They were long and jagged, almost like claw marks. We reasoned it could be a bear or some other animal, but the arrangement was unnatural, too precise, as if drawn by a deliberate hand. The local friend who owned the place shrugged it off, telling us that odd things often happen in the woods and not to worry. We tried to follow his advice, but a lingering sense of dread clung to us. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the tall pines, we lit our lanterns and tried to keep the mood light with jokes and card games. But our nerves were frayed by the recollection of the previous night. Around 10, we heard footsteps crunching through the underbrush. They circled the cabin slowly, deliberately. Through the window, we couldn't see anyone, yet the pattern of footfalls suggested a biped, not a wandering animal. My cousin shouted, warning whoever was out there that we were armed, an empty bluff. The footsteps paused for a moment, then continued that eerie orbit around the cabin. Minutes later, the footsteps stopped. We peered through the window, but saw only shifting shadows. Then came a knock at the door. It was not the heavy pound of a hand, but rather a light tapping, almost polite, but undeniably horrifying in this remote setting. We called out, once again receiving no reply. Another series of taps, this time on the opposite wall, followed by another near the back window. It felt orchestrated, a methodical approach to unsettle us from every angle. We decided the safest option was to barricade ourselves inside until dawn. We moved furniture to block the doors and windows, huddled together, adrenaline coursing through our veins. The tapping continued sporadically, sometimes near, sometimes at the far side of the cabin, always refusing to show itself. We dreaded the moment when it might decide to break in. Hour after torturous hour passed. Finally, the first pale glow of dawn seeped into the cabin. Gathering our nerve, we ventured outside to find nothing. No footprints, no sign of trespassers. Just the same unsettling scratch marks on the walls, more numerous now, as though someone, or something, had spent the night tracing long lines into the wooden exterior. Determined to end the mystery, we packed up our gear and left immediately, practically stumbling over each other to get to the car. When we spoke to our friend afterward, he confessed that he never stayed up there alone. Apparently, local rumors told of a hermit who once occupied that area, someone infamous for stalking unwelcome visitors, doing just enough to scare them off. But deep down, we both felt it was something beyond a mere recluse. Reflecting on the precision, the omnipresent tapping, and the unnerving absence of any footprints, it felt more like we had been toyed with by an unseen entity. I've never set foot near that cabin again, and I doubt I ever will. Story 5. Footsteps on the Mountain. My uncle was an avid hiker, drawn to the most challenging trails with an almost obsessive passion. One summer, he convinced me to accompany him on a multi-day trek up a remote mountain range. Despite my reservations, I agreed, tempted by the promise of breathtaking views and the allure of spending quality time in nature. The first 2 days went smoothly. We followed a steep path past babbling brooks and dense thickets of evergreen. Each night we camped in designated spots, well equipped with supplies and protective gear. On the third day, the weather shifted drastically. Ominous clouds roiled overhead and a cold wind swept through the mountain passes. We found a sheltered area beneath a cluster of rock overhangs and decided to set camp early. That night, as lightning illuminated the sky, I woke to what sounded like faint footsteps just beyond the edge of our camp. Thinking it was my uncle, I called out to him, but he was inside the tent, asleep, and unmoving. My pulse quickened. I flipped on a flashlight and scanned the surrounding darkness. The sound of footsteps ceased instantly. I chalked it up to the wind, or maybe an animal rummaging around. We pressed on the next day, though the trail was slick from the rain. The sense of isolation grew, as we hadn't seen another hiker in days. In late afternoon, a dense fog descended, reducing visibility to a few feet. The wind carried faint echoes like distant voices on the breeze, though we couldn't be sure if it was just the howling gusts. My uncle tried to reassure me, but I noticed his own guarded expression. Evening came quickly in the fog, and we made camp in an even more remote spot enveloped by thick mist. Sometime in the middle of the night, I awoke to the muffled sound of shuffling once again, as though someone paced around our tents. I lay still, every muscle tensed. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Gathering courage, I unzipped my tent just a fraction, shining a small beam of light outside. Through the haze, I glimpsed a figure standing several yards away, partially obscured by the white shroud of fog. Its posture was unnaturally rigid, arms hanging at its sides. The flashlight beam wobbled in my trembling hand. I called out a tentative greeting, and in response the figure simply pivoted in place and disappeared into the swirl of mist. I practically tore my way out of the tent, shouting for my uncle. He emerged, disoriented, shining his flashlight around. We found footprints in the wet earth near our campsite, human footprints larger than mine but smaller than his. They led off into the fog, stopping abruptly as though the figure had vanished into thin air. Confused and shaken, we decided to break camp immediately. My uncle insisted it was just a stray hiker, but the abrupt ending of those footprints troubled us. There were no other shoe prints around, no sign that anyone had approached us on the trail. For the rest of the night, we trudged down the mountain by flashlight hearts, pounding with each crack of a branch or swirl of fog. When dawn finally broke, we collapsed in exhaustion, but relief washed over us. We had descended to an elevation where the fog was less dense and wildlife chirped a soothing morning chorus. We recounted what we saw, but neither of us had a satisfactory explanation. Upon reaching a ranger station at the base, we casually mentioned seeing someone in the fog. A ranger told us that many years ago a hiker had wandered off the main path, gotten lost in treacherous terrain, and was never found. Some claimed the hiker's spirit still roamed those mountains, eternally searching for a way home. My uncle and I exchanged grim looks, but said nothing further. To this day, we're both convinced that the figure we encountered was not a wandering camper. Something about its presence felt off, almost hollow. While the memory remains as foggy as the mountain mists, the dread we felt that night was intensely real. We learned that nature can host not only beautiful vistas and wildlife, but also inexplicable phenomena that remind us we might not be alone, even in the most desolate places. I grew up in a home built in the early 1900s, complete with a musty, unfinished basement. It was a place I avoided unless absolutely necessary. The combination of low ceilings, flickering lights, and the pungent smell of damp earth set the stage for unsettling vibes. One day my mom came home with an antique mirror she found at a yard sale, saying it would add character to our old house. We decided to store it in the basement until we found the perfect spot for it upstairs. Something about that mirror gave me an odd feeling from the start. The glass was slightly warped, and the decorative frame depicted bizarre faces, almost gargoyle-like, etched into the metal. A few days later, I went down to fetch some tools and noticed the mirror had been propped against a wall. Despite the poor lighting, it reflected me with startling clarity, but there was a distortion around my reflection's eyes. Instead of seeing my own gaze, I saw faint glimmers of something else, as though a second presence hovered just inside the glass, gazing back. I laughed it off, telling myself it was just the mirror's imperfections playing tricks on my mind. Weeks passed, and I almost forgot about the mirror. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard footsteps in the hallway that led to the basement stairs. My parents were asleep, so I tiptoed out to investigate, using a small flashlight to guide my way. At the top of the basement steps, the air felt colder. I listened intently. A faint scraping echoed from below, like metal dragging against concrete. My heart pounded as I descended, step by cautious step. The basement light flickered on, and to my bewilderment, the mirror stood upright in the middle of the floor, a good 10 feet from where it had been left. Every hair on my body stood on end. The mirror was angled so that it faced the steps, as if anticipating my arrival. The scraping sound must have been the mirror moving across the rough floor, yet how did it move by itself? I stayed rooted on the bottom step, uncertain whether to bolt upstairs or approach it. Gathering a thread of courage, I stepped closer. My reflection wavered in the dim light. Then I saw it, a detail in the glass that wasn't me. Just behind my shoulder in the reflection was a faint figure, tall and elongated, with glowing pinpoints where the eyes should have been. I whipped around, shining the flashlight, but nobody was there. My breath came in ragged gasps. When I turned my attention back to the mirror, the figure remained, lurking behind my reflection in the glass. Stricken with terror, I stumbled backward, nearly losing my balance. Without warning, the overhead light went out, plunging the basement into darkness. My flashlight flickered and I felt a piercing chill, as though something brushed past me. Panicked, I fled upstairs, leaving the mirror behind. The next morning, I told my parents everything. Naturally, they were skeptical, chalking it up to nightmares and an overactive imagination. Seeing how distressed I was, my mom agreed to move the mirror out. We loaded it onto her truck and drove back to the yard sale location, hoping the original seller might take it back. The seller claimed ignorance, but she did mention the mirror had belonged to her late uncle, who collected oddities from estate sales. She was more than willing to take it off our hands, though I wondered if she suspected something else. After the mirror left our home, the basement felt lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted. I no longer heard footsteps at night, nor did I sense that unsettling presence in the shadows. Yet I remained haunted by what I had seen in that glass. The image of that elongated figure behind my reflection is etched into my mind. Now, whenever I see an antique mirror, I can't help but recall the disturbing sight of those faintly glowing eyes, and how the mirror seemed to move on its own, as if driven by a malignant force. When I was 19, I rented a small apartment in a rundown building. The plumbing clanged, the electricity was fickle, and the thin walls meant I could hear my neighbors' every argument. Still, it was mine, and I was proud to live independently. Shortly after moving in, I began feeling uneasy, particularly at night. The sensation was akin to being watched, like someone stood in the corner just out of sight. I dismissed it as nerves in a new place. But things escalated quickly. One night, as I sat in my tiny living room watching television, I felt a subtle shift in the air, followed by a soft creak behind me. I turned to find the old rocking chair, which I had inherited from my grandmother, moving gently back and forth. The windows were closed, the ceiling sealed. There was no draft that could have caused it. My throat went dry, but I tried to remain logical. Perhaps vibrations from a passing truck had set it in motion. Days later, small items started disappearing or relocating. My keys vanished from the kitchen counter, only to show up in the bathroom cabinet. My phone charger went missing until I found it coiled on the rocking chair. Initially, I blamed my scatterbrained nature, but I grew less convinced with each new incident. My alarm clock, which I always placed on my bedside table, ended up near the door one morning. Books on my shelf rearranged themselves inexplicably. Soon, I was double-checking everything before bed, but still, objects moved. As if that weren't unsettling enough, I began hearing faint whispering at night. It was impossible to decipher the words, but the voices seemed multiple, overlapping, and they always emanated from close by. More than once I woke up drenched in sweat, convinced that a presence was looming over me, breathing softly. But every time I turned on the light, the room was empty. Sleep became a struggle, and I started avoiding the apartment late at night. I confided in a neighbor, an older woman who had lived in the building for decades. She listened solemnly and revealed that the building had a history. It had once been a boarding house where, according to rumor, a tragic fire claimed several lives. In hushed tones, she suggested that maybe some restless spirits lingered. Although I wasn't a firm believer in the paranormal, I couldn't ignore the pattern of bizarre happenings. One particularly chilling night, I woke to a suffocating feeling, as though someone was pressing down on my chest. I tried to yell, but no sound emerged from my throat. My eyes darted around, and I glimpsed a dark silhouette by the bedroom door. Frozen in terror, I stared as it edged closer, the shape featureless yet radiating a looming malevolence. With one surge of adrenaline, I yanked myself upright, gasping for air. The silhouette melted into the darkness. I dashed to turn on every light in the apartment, refusing to let the shadows gather. The next morning, I sought help from a friend who claimed to be sensitive to spirits and energies. She visited, walking through each room, humming softly under her breath. She placed bowls of salt in the corners and burned a bundle of sage, speaking gentle words about releasing trapped energies. I didn't know if I believed in any of it, but desperation had driven me to try anything. As the smoke swirled through the rooms, I felt a shift, like a gentle breeze stirring stale air. My friend insisted that if there were entities present, they were no longer malevolent. They had been asked to move on. In the days that followed, the apartment grew quieter. The rocking chair no longer moved. The strange whispers receded. My items stayed where I left them. The tension that had gripped the space eased, and I felt more at peace. Though relieved, I couldn't forget the night I saw that silhouette creeping toward my bed, draining the breath from my lungs. To this day, I keep a small dish of salt by the door and an old piece of sage in my kitchen drawer. I never want to experience that suffocating darkness again. Story 8, the third floor ward. In my early 20s, I volunteered at a hospital as a way to give back to the community. Part of my job included delivering reading materials to patients throughout various wards. One particular floor was rarely full, an older wing that was in the process of being phased out. Many of the rooms were empty or used for storage. It felt perpetually sad, the fluorescent lights flickering and the paint peeling from the walls. One evening I was tasked with dropping off newspapers to a few long-term patients on the third floor. My cart squeaked as I navigated the corridors, the quiet so absolute that my footsteps echoed. While passing an empty room, I heard a distinct cough come from inside. Puzzled, I peeked in. The room was dark, the bed stripped, no sign of any occupant. Yet the echo of that cough still lingered in my ears. Trying to shake off the unease, I continued on my route. As I finished delivering papers, I realized I had missed one patient at the far end. Pushing my cart through the poorly lit hallway, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure appeared to slip into room 323, a space I knew was closed for renovations. Thinking it might be a lost visitor, I decided to guide them back to the main hallway. I approached the doorway, calling out quietly, but got no response. Then I stepped inside, flicking on the light. The room was vacant and appeared in disarray, with plastic sheets covering old equipment. I was about to leave when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, only to see the corridor was empty once again. My heart thumped harder as I recalled rumors among the hospital staff about ghostly sightings in this the haunted hospital. Some believed that old patients who had died there never truly left. I wasn't sure what to think, but my intuition told me there was something off about that corridor. The logical part of me wanted to dismiss it as nerves, while another part urged me to leave immediately. Determined to finish, I finally located the last patient's room. After a brief chat, I started heading back to the elevator. That's when I heard a woman's voice down the hall, soft yet commanding, calling my name. My blood went cold. I hadn't told anyone I'd be on this floor, and even if a nurse knew, it seemed unusual to call out like that. Against my better judgment, I walked toward the voice. It seemed to emanate from near room 323 again. The door was ajar, though I remembered leaving it closed. A chilling wave of anxiety gripped me. Inside, the lights were off, but I could just make out a shadow near the window. I called out, asking if anyone needed help. For a moment, the figure remained motionless, then turned slightly. I took a step closer, my stomach twisting into knots. Suddenly, the door slammed shut in my face, the echo reverberating through the empty hallway. My pulse skyrocketed as I grabbed the handle. Locked. In panic, I banged on the door, but there was no response, no light seeping through the gap. Fear overcame me, and I practically sprinted back to the elevator, numb with shock. When I finally reached the nurses' station on a busier floor, I told the staff what had happened. They seemed concerned, but not entirely surprised. One older nurse shared that room 323 had been the site of various unexplained incidents. Lights would flicker uncontrollably, and staff occasionally heard coughing or whispering in the empty room. The door had been found ajar when no one had used it for months, as if inviting unsuspecting passers-by to enter. I finished my volunteer shift with trembling hands, vowing never again to linger on the third floor alone. Every hospital has its own stories, but the sightings and voices in that wing felt disturbingly real, reminding me that life and death can intersect in disquieting ways. Sometimes, the echo of those who've passed on remains powerful enough to make its presence known in the corridors of the living. Story 9. Trapped in the graveyard. Growing up near a historical cemetery, I would often wander through it during daylight. I liked reading the headstones, speculating on the lives once lived, imagining stories of each person. Despite the somber setting, it never frightened me. The old tombstones, the gnarled oak trees, even the crypts with their ornate doors felt more melancholic than scary. Story 9. Trapped in the graveyard. Growing up near a historical cemetery, I would often wander through it during daylight. I liked reading the headstones, speculating on the lives once lived, imagining stories of each person. Despite the somber setting, it never frightened me. The old tombstones, the gnarled oak trees, even the crypts with their ornate doors felt more melancholic than scary. But one autumn evening, I decided to take a shortcut through the cemetery on my way home. The sun had just set and shadows stretched across the ground. As I walked among the graves, a gust of wind rustled the leaves, making an eerie hiss. I quickened my pace, unnerved by the stillness creeping in as dusk settled. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel not far behind me. I assumed it was another passerby taking a shortcut. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw nobody there, yet the footsteps persisted, matching my own pace. I slowed. The footsteps slowed. My heart beat uncomfortably fast. Mustering courage, I called out, asking if anyone was there. Silence answered me. With growing trepidation, I continued forward, the caretaker's small office in sight near the main gate. By now, full darkness loomed, and the cemetery's old lampposts cast weak circles of dim light. The repeated crunch of gravel behind me resumed. Swallowing fear, I turned abruptly. A shadow darted between headstones. The fleeting image was too quick to describe properly, but it seemed tall, too dark, and it moved in a jerky fashion like a puppet with tangled strings. I started to run, no longer caring about pride. My footsteps pounded on the pathway as I raced for the gate. A swirl of leaves and dust blocked my view momentarily, and I nearly collided with the caretaker, an elderly man locking up for the night. I tried to explain what I saw, but I was out of breath, trembling. The caretaker nodded sympathetically, though a hint of worry tugged at his expression. He offered to walk me to the main entrance. Together, we hurried. As we neared the gate, we found it stuck. It was an old iron gate, prone to jamming, but tonight it felt almost intentionally sealed, refusing to budge. I felt an irrational panic mounting, certain that we were trapped. The caretaker struggled, cursing under his breath, while I glanced back down the dark path lined with graves. Dimly, I saw that same shape flit between tombstones. For a moment it stopped, and even from a distance I sensed it was staring at us. A wave of dizziness rolled over me. The caretaker finally managed to rattle the gate open. We slipped through, hastily pushing it closed behind us. We parted ways quickly. I sprinted home, my mind racing with questions. The caretaker never elaborated on what might lurk in the cemetery after dark, but his reaction told me that unexplained events weren't new to him. Eventually, curiosity compelled me to ask him directly about that night. He only remarked that the land had centuries of history, some of it possibly stained by dark deeds or restless souls. I no longer choose the cemetery as a convenient shortcut. Even in daylight, I quickened my steps, remembering the sudden footsteps that matched my own and the inhuman shape that lurked among the tombstones. It reminded me that places of rest can also become places of unsettling encounters. In the quiet twilight, when the living fail to intrude, sometimes the dead or something else entirely decides to make itself known. During a trip to an old coastal town, I stayed in a quaint bed and breakfast known for its vintage charm. The building was over 100 years old, filled with antique furniture and old photographs of past owners and guests. My room was on the second floor, overlooking a rocky shoreline. The waves crashed relentlessly against the rocks, creating a soothing yet eerie soundtrack. From the moment I arrived, I felt a heavy atmosphere, as though invisible eyes observed me from behind the floral wallpaper. On my second night, I was awakened by a strange dream of a woman dressed in outdated clothing. She stood by the window, staring into the distance with an expression of profound sadness. I called out, but she didn't move. A sudden jolt of thunder awoke me fully, and I realized the dream had been unnervingly vivid. The next day, I asked the innkeeper if there were any local legends about a woman. She hesitated before revealing that the original owner's wife had mysteriously drowned off the coast decades ago. Her body never recovered. Some claimed she still wandered the house, burdened by unfinished business. That evening, as rain pounded the roof, I decided to have a quiet night in. I sipped tea by the glow of a small lamp, reading a novel. A powerful gust of wind rattled the window, and the lamp flickered. Then, abruptly, the power cut off, plunging the room into darkness. Thunder boomed across the sky, and lightning lit the space in stark flashes. In one of those flashes, I saw her, the same woman from my dream, standing in the corner of the room. Her clothing was dripping wet, her hair matted. An expression of sorrow twisted her features. My heart thudded painfully. The next flash of lightning illuminated the room again, revealing only emptiness where she had stood. I realized I was shaking violently, my pulse racing. The storm raged on outside and the room grew colder. I stood searching for a flashlight, trying to steady my breath. After fumbling through drawers, I found one. The beam revealed damp footprints on the hardwood floor, trailing from the corner to the window. They ended abruptly at the sill, as though the woman had vanished into thin air. Fear warred with compassion. She seemed anguished rather than hostile. I approached the window, peering at the raging sea outside. A bright lightning flash lit the shoreline, revealing jagged rocks and churning water. In that brief moment, I thought I saw a figure near the edge, gazing up at my window. The next flash came and the figure was gone. Although I was terrified, a sense of heartbreak or longing also filled me, as though the woman from my dream and the vision by the sea were connected. Perhaps she was reaching out for help or warning me of something. The storm subsided by morning, and I spoke to the innkeeper again, mentioning the footprints. Her eyes widened. She confessed that years ago she discovered similar wet footprints after guests reported apparitions. The story was always linked to the drowned wife, rumored to appear on stormy nights. Some local folklore suggested she tried to protect people from suffering the same fate. Others believed she was searching for her lost child, though no records confirmed she had one. On my final night, as I packed my bags, a sense of dread and pity overwhelmed me. Part of me wanted to see her again, to offer comfort. But deep down, I feared that her sorrow was too immense, too ingrained in the house itself, for any mortal to ease her suffering. I left at dawn, grateful for the haunting yet profound experience. Even now, memories of her soaked dress and the anguished look in her eyes linger, reminding me that some tragedies never rest, and lost souls may wander the places of their demise, seeking solace or offering quiet warnings to those who would listen. Thank you for joining Whispering Reapers for this journey into the unknown. Until next time, stay vigilant, keep your lights on, and remember, sometimes the real terror is closer than you think.